Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another Expert Corner segment. Today, I have Neil Townsend, Chief Market Analyst for FarmLink Marketing Solutions and GrainFox, joining us again. How are you, Neil?
I'm doing well. How are you doing, Tracy?
Fantastic. So I'm excited to have you back on the show, and I'm hoping you can give us a bit of a market update. There's so much going on. I think our audience will get a lot of value about hearing what's going on from you.
Yeah, I mean, there is definitely a ton of stuff going on. Maybe I'll start with a little anecdote. A good friend of mine is a market analyst based out of Geneva, Switzerland, and he's a slightly older gentleman. But he recently announced that he's going to retire, and the reason he gave for retiring is that he said, I like grains and oilseeds markets. But now with all the stuff that's going on, I'm demanded to be a macroeconomist, a geopolitical person. I have to try and get inside of the head of, Vladimir Putin and think about what he's thinking about. And he says, I just don't find that enjoyable. It's just hard to know what's going on. And I tend to agree with him. Like, I think there's so much going on in the grains and oilseeds markets. I traditionally have been a fundamentalist, meaning that I look at the numbers involving supply and demand, how much was produced, what was yield, how much is going to be demanded, is there growth in the biofuel sector, is there growth in feeding, what is the potential for exports? And then at the end of all that work, you're left with sort of an ending stocks, how much is left over. And I like to say that the magnitude and direction of the change of ending stocks is what dictates price movements. But today we live in an environment where just having a grasp on the fundamentals is really, minimally telling us the story of where prices are going and what's going to happen in the markets. That's one of the reasons why FarmLink and GrainFox were bringing together multiple experts on October 13th for a webinar. We're going to talk about it a bit more later, but we brought in a specific geopolitical specialist. We brought in somebody who knows about fertilizers and inputs. We brought in a person who can speak with more depth and knowledge on the foreign exchange rates and those kinds of things. And I just think that's really what you need nowadays because, I could do a supply and demand balance sheet, but that's only part of the story. And that's where we are at, is like there are some supportive things in the market. If you just look at the fundamentals, the US corn yield is disappointing this year. It might fall below 170 bushels an acre. Typically, when it falls below expectations and the stocks are getting tighter, you would say you're in for, a year of buoyancy in prices and good price support from that corn S&D. But because there's so many macroeconomic headwinds, we don't have a great grasp on what demand will be for the entirety of the 12 months of the marketing year.
That makes sense. Okay. I have some questions for you. Let me know when you're ready.
I'm totally ready, Tracy.
You're ready? Okay, good. I have 4 things I hear a lot of farmers talking about, wondering about. They're 4 things kind of on my mind. So do you want to start with the US dollar and kind of go into foreign exchange? Where's that all at?
Yeah, totally. And again, that is, the number one issue in the market right now. And the US dollar just sort of encompasses all of the angst that people are having about the macroeconomic, situation. What's happened is, I guess, post-COVID, during the COVID era, shall we call it that, a lot of money was kind of hosed around. I mean, we had the CERB in Canada, they had the equivalent in the US, they were doing things in the, the European Union and Australia. There's a lot of money floating around. So the money supply went up. In the post-COVID world, when people start to go back out, there was a lot of jobs, people were taking jobs, people were spending this money, but the supply chain really hadn't been fixed. So like prices were going up, and because labor was tight, the cost of labor was going up. So what we had is inflation. And most of us, even myself included, I was too young when we had, serious inflation in the late 70s, early 80s. But, people who remember that, it was a fairly devastating time in terms of building wealth, in terms of, getting a house or owning a house and that kind of thing. So that's bred a lot of uncertainty and volatility in the markets. I mean, people who are invested in the stock market know, like we've had, a lot of downs, more downs than ups this year for sure in that market. And that sort of bled into the broader world. And you throw in things like the geopolitical situation, the war in Ukraine, we might touch on that later. But all of these things have led to sort of, higher inflation than maybe expected. And now the governments are stepping in, the central bankers, they're trying to control that. The mechanism they have is raising interest rates. And that's just wrought a lot of damage to the markets, quite frankly. And again, you can blame the markets for being too high or whatever, but the bottom line is people don't know what to invest in now. And one of the things that's the big winner is the US dollar. And, the US dollar is critically important for world trade. It's the number one, sort of a hedge currency. Like when people are, insecure about the future, they'd rather hold US dollars. What does a stronger US dollar do to farmers? I mean, on the one hand, it's good for Canadians because we sell most of our goods offshore in US dollars. So those can be converted for more Canadian dollars. The second thing, though, is it does increase input costs. So, you want to buy a tractor, you want to buy fertilizer, chemical, all of those things are going to cost much, much more. A third thing is it's all about relativity. And I mean, we might have a declining Canadian dollar, but if some of our competitors or some of our markets, if their currencies are declining at an even faster rate, that means that they're incentivized to export more, obtain more US dollars, and they're incentivized they're de-incentivized to import. They want to import less because imports cost more. So, you talk about a market, for example, like Italy, where the euro's really crashed. It's a key market for durum. Do they want to buy as much durum because they feel poorer right now?
Fantastic. Thank you. I think that is the best explanation I've heard about the dollar foreign exchange in a long time. So thank you for that.
Yeah, okay. And I will just add to
ahead,
that, Tracy, that
please.
I am not an expert in macroeconomics and foreign exchange. I'm just taking that's the basic thing that's happening. But at the webinar that we're going to have on October 13th at 10 a.m., we will have a person who has more in-depth knowledge and has put together papers about the impact of interest rates on foreign exchange and the relative rates comparing us to some of our competitors and some of our destination markets.
I can't wait for the webinar. Okay, my next question, if you're ready for it, is China, China, China. A lot about China. Talk about China.
Yeah, another little anecdote here. Back in the past, in the early part of this century, I worked for Cargill, great company, great job. And I had a lot of time I spent out in the countryside, walking up the driveway, meeting with farmers, sitting at the farm table, discussing markets with farmers. And, very often they would give me like a younger person, from Cargill, a trainee, to kind of come with me and walk up to meet the farmers. And it's funny, Canada's such a multicultural place. And I often would have a person from, a different country, and farmers were always super kind to those people. But nothing prepared me for the time that I had a person from, a recent Canadian immigrant from China with me. Farmers were absolutely fascinated with that. And not in I'm saying in a business way. They wanted to know what is going on in China. And that was in 2006, 7. Now, 15 years later, China is the 1.4 billion person elephant in the room. It's just always what is China doing? And China's been a big help to Canada. We've exported a lot of stuff there. We've had our problems with China. Everybody remembers the Huawei executive being detained in Canada on an extradition to the US and, some retaliation by the Chinese. That was a very uncomfortable period. Companies were named. They couldn't export to China. Now, the situation in 2022 is China's still very important, but it's more opaque, unknowable than ever. They're still dealing with COVID in a drastically different way than we're dealing with COVID. They still haven't completely opened up their economy. They're one of the engines that drives the world, yet, the supply chain is still a little bit muddled there. They've got some issues with the property. And the end result for us is we just don't know exactly what their demand's going to be. So you take canola, very important crop for us. Their demand can be anywhere from 2.5 million to 4.5 million tons. And it makes a huge difference in terms of what happens with the ending stocks. And finally, I just say about China is that, because the biggest story in the commodity space right now is this macroeconomic headwind that's very difficult to battle against. But one of the things that could really resolve that would be China more fully embracing, trade and the economy and getting back into gear like they were, pre-COVID, right? Because they were always a very encouraging story, despite sort of, our little trade spats we had with them.
Okay, perfect. You took my next question, and I think you covered it. China and the connection to canola. Do you want to add on that, or can I ask my next question for you?
No, I think we should touch on canola a little bit.
Okay,
there's some
good.
positive fundamentals with canola. This is one of those unfortunate circumstances that happen from time to time where, how do we get it into a positive channel is we have a little bit of a disappointing harvest. Now, we didn't have a disaster like we had last year in 2021, but in 2022, I'd say the crop that in the Canadian farmer's mind underperformed the most on average was canola. So we have a little bit smaller supply than we expected. And, that's positive, except as I mentioned with China, we just have a wide range of, how much are they going to demand over the entirety of the year? And it makes a difference because if they buy 2.5 million tons as opposed to 4.5 million tons, then we have to find a home for another, 1.5 to 2 million tons of canola. And right now, just sort of, tail end of September, early October, things look pretty positive for canola. We're seeing some good buying action out there. But again, there's just so many headwinds. We don't know like about what's biofuel demand going to be in 22, 23. Like that might have an impact because of the, a sluggish economy. People drive less, so we don't need to include it. So I'm fairly optimistic about canola, but I just would have to acknowledge that there's a big risk with the macroeconomics and also the unknown that we have in China.
Love it. You know what you said earlier about your friend retiring? I do not envy you guys in your role right now. You look at the markets and everything you had to pay attention to before, that was enough. Now there just seems to be so many extra layers to it, right?
Definitely. I mean, and one thing maybe being a Canadian, enjoying living in Western Canada, one thing that does prepare you for some of this is, we grow a wider basket of goods than most farmers around the world, right? Like we have, 20 sort of significant crops that farmers care about. Not every farmer grows every crop, and for years we've had to pay attention to markets like China and also India for a lot of our pulse crops like lentils and peas. So we have this, and both countries, China and India, I mean, they don't fully operate in like a market-based economy. I mean, a lot of it's to do with policy or, concerns about food security or income security. So we have some expertise in those issues, but to put it all together and to kind of have it for the whole world, I mean, it's not a job for one person. And that's why, again, at the webinar on October 13th, we're going to bring together a team of people so that, farmers or interested onlookers in this industry can see like, here's how you build a consensus. Here's how you build a network of information to provide the best possible analytical interpretation of what's going on.
Fantastic. Okay. Now, the one other one that I know is on everybody's mind and we're hearing about is the war in Ukraine. Do you want to touch on that right now?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, it's a human tragedy. I mean, I don't think, I guess the world is never entirely a peaceful place, but I don't think people thought that there'd be a major land war in Europe. And it's, it seems to be grinding on, and it seems to be costing a lot of Russian lives and definitely a lot of Ukrainian lives and disrupting, people's lives. It's also been very disruptive for, the world market, particularly for wheat, but also for corn and many other crops, sunflowers. And I think the big thing about it is it injected a major amount of uncertainty into the market because there's no timeline on the war. Like we don't know when it's going to end. Recent activities from Russia have been showing signs of escalation or desperation. I mean, if it's desperation, I mean, that even opens up a can of worms we don't even want to talk about, ultimately what kind of weapons could be used, tactically in Ukraine or even strategically. So, it has been disrupted. But this is what we do know. I mean, at the current moment, there is an export corridor that's being guaranteed by the UN, by Turkey, and also by Russia that's worked pretty good, and it's got some grain out of Ukraine. Simultaneously, Russia has been actively stealing grain from Ukraine and putting that out into the world market. Russia also grew their biggest crop ever since the fall of the Soviet Union. And, they are actively exporting that, probably not at the pace they need to or could without the war going on. And then right now, farmers in both Russia and Ukraine are busy trying to get ready to plant their winter crops. I mean, about 35% of the territory that's for wheat is directly in the war zone or occupied by Russia. I mean, how do you even begin to interpret how much wheat Ukraine's going to grow? So there's a lot going on there. And I think, once again, I want to talk about our webinar. We're bringing in a geopolitical specialist who has a lot of expertise in those areas to kind of give us some guidance about, what will happen? What's the end game? How long could we expect this to last? And, is it going to get worse before it gets better? Is it going to gradually just, grind to a halt? We don't know, but, at least we're asking somebody who might have some insight into that area.
Fantastic. Okay. Thank you so much for all of that. That was a wonderful update. Now, we've chatted about it a little bit. We've talked about it in detail in our last segment together. Why don't we talk about the upcoming GrainFox event? You want to go over that a little bit more? I know you've alluded to it a little bit, but dive back in for the individuals that missed the last segment.
Yeah, absolutely, Tracy. So we're bringing together, multiple experts from multiple different sectors of the commodity space and, macroeconomics, geopolitics. And we're going to bring them together on October 13th at 10 a.m. Central Standard Time. The event's called From Bin to Bank, Harvest and Market Insights from the Experts. It's going to be on Zoom, so it's a virtual thing. The moderator is going to be Karen Braun of Thomson Reuters, and there's going to be a roundtable discussion featuring 6 panelists, including input specialists on fertilizer and chemicals and those kinds of things. We're going to answer questions. We're going to provide market analysis and commentary and deliver insights on the current events that affect the agricultural industry. And, as I discussed in this, segment here, there is a lot going on in the industry, and this is the type of event that I would like to go to, even if I were just listening, because right now it's not just about, you got to open your eyes, you got to open your ears, you got to prepare, because, this is a significant situation. And the one thing I really want to stress to, listeners and potential participants in the webinar is that, this is a market that could turn quite dramatically on a dime, and value could be evaporated, right? So we want to be prepared for that, and that's why we want to kind of cover all the angles: foreign exchange, geopolitics, macroeconomics, input availability, not just cost but availability, because there's a lot of fertilizer plants in the European Union have been shut down right now because gas prices are so high. You need energy to produce fertilizer. So the experts on our panel, they're going to come from multiple ag sectors. And it's going to be on October 13th, which is the day after one of the most critical USDA reports of the marketing year, the October WASDE. We're going to get a fuller insight into what exactly transpired in the U.S. growing season. We're going to get, more information on just how much corn there is. And as I always say, corn is king, and the U.S. is the king of the kings when it comes to corn. So we're going to look at that. We're also going to touch on all these things. And we're also providing lots of segments where producers and other participants in the webinar can ask questions and have them answered by experts. So don't forget, also included with the webinar, for those people who are a little bit more tactile or want to think about it a little bit longer, we prepare a big report. In the report will be, numbers and statistics and the actual supply and demand balance tables. So you'll have that. That proved to be a very important report, a very popular report on our spring webinar. And I just want to encourage people to sign up. This is truly a one-of-a-kind event that producers can benefit from as they progress with this marketing year in the post, harvest, or if they're just finishing up harvest, where they can hopefully have some clarity to be able to make some decisions.
Fantastic. Like I said earlier, I'm excited. I want to tune in and hear from all the different experts. What you gave was fantastic, Neil. A great snapshot, but to dive in and hear people that specialize in each of those areas, I'm pretty pumped. So anybody watching, listening, how can they sign up for the event?
Yeah, it's very easy. Just go to www.farmlinksolutions.ca, and you're going to see, a link there for the event, which is called From Bin to Bank. So farmlinksolutions.ca / From Bin to Bank. And that's where you get. I want to say space is limited. Spots are filling up fast. So it's a good idea to register now and save your seat. And once again, the event is on October 13th at 10 a.m. Central Standard Time. If you're interested in getting the harvest report following event, you can also sign up for that, and you get a free 3-month free trial through the same link for GrainFox and all the exciting things that are happening on GrainFox. And again, once again, farmlinksolutions.ca / From Bin to Bank. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you, Neil. And as always, if you're looking for any of the information Neil just shared, the links, it'll all be on the show page. So go to Farm Marketer into our news section and you'll find it there. Neil, thank you. I really enjoyed this chat and I always appreciate your time. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tracy.
You are welcome. It's my pleasure. And you in the audience, thank you so much for tuning in. Don't wait, sign up for the event, and make sure to tap into all the knowledge that FarmLink and GrainFox are bringing together on this event. Thanks, guys. See you next time. Bye-bye.